Hello, my guest today is the Reverend Ann with an E, Holmes. Reverend Holmes has been in ministry for many years, and we're sitting down with Reverend Holmes to discuss her legacy with the UCC as being the first openly lesbian ordained in the United Church of Christ over 40 years ago.
Any denomination.
In any denomination. So we want to make that clarity and put that point out there for you to think about as I engage Ann in some questions about this journey. And so today we're going to ask Ann a series of questions and she's going to answer them for us. And I'm going to sprinkle them with some other questions and see where this interview goes. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Now let's talk about what happened back 40 years ago. How did all of this come to fruition?
Well, gosh, it's longer than 40 years then.
Yes.
When I was in, and I'll just briefly say this, when I was in college, I was a Presbyterian. I planned to go to Div Seminary, Princeton Seminary. And I realized at the last minute, I was walking down the aisle to graduate, that would not hold water, that I could not be myself there. So I stopped. I moved someplace else. And I moved to Nashville because I eventually ended up at Vanderbilt, which was a much better fit anyway for me. Mm-hmm. But then I worked as a probation officer investigating child abuse and neglect cases, and decided I would try again to go to divinity school. So I went to Vanderbilt. I spent the first year at Vanderbilt working as a probation officer as well as being in school, which really was a wonderful thing. I could really put some theological teeth to it, mm-hmm. to my experiences. Then all of my friends were going to be ordained, and my professors and people said, you'd be a great minister, just don't tell anybody who you are. And I said, well, I can't do that. I mean, that doesn't feel right to me. So I didn't get ordained, and I went on and did some other things. And I had always planned to go to become a supervisor, CPE supervisor, and I was going to do my training at St. E's. And I'm from the DC area, so I came back here and started that training. Okay, now here we are, and all of a sudden, I mean, everybody knows who I am. I've been out for 10 years, for God's sakes. Everybody knows who I am, but somebody in my church decided to make an issue out of it. So it became an issue in a way that I was not anticipating. So we put everything on hold. I mean, I had been already approved to be, for my ecclesiastical council. So we put everything on hold, and we spent about a year and a half to 2 years in study and in seminars and workshops about this. A lot of it was about me, but it was about this. Should anyone be ordained? Now, don't forget, I'm in Virginia.
Right.
So that's an obstacle in and of itself. I'm in a small town in Virginia. Mm-hmm. So we did that and that was horrible in many ways for me. I just have to be honest. I've really never talked about this, the pain. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of good things happen. There's no question about it. My colleagues in the UCC were right behind me. Mm-hmm. My colleagues at St. Elizabeth's, for the most part, were right behind me. My cousin, on the other hand, called me and said, can't you go to another country and do this? And he heard about it on the radio, NPR. Yes. So there were a lot of it was a mixed bag for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And I really just it was really hard. And And I'm not an out there kind of person. I'm an introvert.
Mhm.
So I'm not somebody who would stand up and say, I gotta be me.
Exactly.
That's not who I am. I've got to be me, but I'm saying it, like this. And so I struggled. And then we had my ecclesiastical council. Now, I don't know, back in the day and nowadays, you can't get anybody to come to ecclesiastical councils for the most part. But mine, of course, has standing room only. And let me just tell you how scared I was that day. I was up on a stage and I had a microphone in my hand and I had a light. I think I had a light on me. That's what I remember. Maybe I was dying. I don't know. So we did that and they ultimately voted in my favor, obviously, to be ordained.
Yes.
As
Oh,
time
happy day.
Huh?
I said, oh, happy day.
Yeah, so happy day. And I didn't think it would happen. So I didn't even have a date picked out for my ordination. So we had to start at ground zero to move on. And I did great until I went to Cumberland, Maryland. And I was a chaplain in a state psych hospital. And I had a little church in Frostburg. And they figured out who I was in the Penn West conference. So they made a big deal about it, called the church, called the hospitals. And of course, I was let go from all of that. And it was at that point that everything kind of came forward. And I had PTSD. And the reason I'm saying that is that there were rumors going around about me, I'm a hermit. I don't go out. I don't speak to people. I do. I would be a hermit if I could, but I'm not a hermit. I was just dealing with my PTSD and working through that for a lot of years. So anyway, I just wanted to get that kind of out there and let people know that I love you all and I am very appreciative of the United Church of Christ, and I love the United Church of Christ for the most part.
I like that. I think it's very prevalent for most of us to have PTSD, for most of us to have experienced great trauma before the ordination process. Most of us have had childhood trauma.
Yes.
And I want to acknowledge that a lot of childhood trauma came from us finding or becoming our true authentic self. And then something catastrophic happened later on to trigger those feelings and emotions that we had in our childhood. Did you really have that gut kind of feeling that, how much do I share? How much do people want to know? And
oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And I think about it, and the reason I'm sharing this is not something I do easily. And my wife was saying, are you gonna, I don't know, is because I know that there are people out there who struggle and that there are ways to get help. And that the church is not a bad place to get help if you haven't been hurt by the church. And I came through it to the other side and was able to work and was able to be productive and was able to retire and have grandchildren.
That is amazing. What a wonderful story. But I just want you to revisit the hurt that you had. I think people don't realize that hurt can be in the form of many different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual abuse. It doesn't have to necessarily be anything but just a feeling of not belonging. Can you talk about that sense of not belonging and how you kind of moved into a sense of belonging, because we all belong to Christ?
Yeah, I never felt like I belonged, although I was not in touch with my sexuality until I was 20. But I never felt like I belonged, but I couldn't figure out why I didn't. I used to say to a therapist, I can't figure out what kind of clothes to wear. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so, yeah, I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I belonged in the church, although I did belong in the church. I didn't feel like I belonged, I didn't feel worthy of having a family or any of that. So not feeling like you belong really does cause alienation and separation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was years, because it took me a long time to get in touch and do all this stuff. It doesn't have to take years to realize that I'm okay the way who I am. I'm a child of God, and I am not perfect by any means, and that's okay. Because, when you're hiding, you want to be perfect because you don't want to be seen. You don't want to be caught. You don't want to be whatever. So it was years later that when I started telling my story, not to the church, but other places, that I felt feeling of belonging.
Is sharing your story healing, or does it bring up the pain that you had in the past?
No, it's very healing. When I first shared my story, quite frankly, I was drinking too much, and my partner one day had somebody at my house to pick me up, put me on a plane, and take me to Florida to deal with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And this place happens to believe that any kind of substance abuse or whatever is pretty much a direct correlation to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to deal with the trauma if you want to get people better. And so that's what I did. And it was an amazing process, because telling my story and being affirmed, even though it was a secular place, it was pretty spiritual. And I think, though, I'm going to caution here, because you have to be careful when and where you tell your story. You can't just go around telling it to anybody and everybody, because not everybody will hold it with you. And so you want to be thoughtful about that. Because the other desire is to let people know who you are, and act it out and do all these things so that people will finally see you, right?
Right. So you weren't one of those flag waving lesbians that ended up doing the gay pride and all that in the beginning. You were still dealing with your self issues, right?
Well, yes, but I did Pride. I mean, I went to the first Washington Pride. I went to all the things. We took our daughter to Spirit Fire, whatever, concerts, and we marched and all of that stuff. But I wasn't the kind of person who would stand up and speak in that environment. I'm not afraid to speak, but that just wasn't my forte at the time. Now, I'll blow them up.
I love it. Now, tell me about your ordination day. How did you prepare for your ordination? Well, let's lead up to that. How was it? How was the planning, the execution? We all have ordination stories. So how did you do this?
We do, but can I tell you a ecclesiastical council quick story?
Oh, yes, we have plenty of time.
Okay, so I met who ended up being my wife. Okay, I'm at her house. I'm feeding her daughter. Her daughter was a year or something at the time, 2 years, a year. And I didn't realize this, but my spoon is going like this. And she's going like that, trying to get it. Because I was asking, now, who are my favorite theologians? I can't remember. But anyway,
I love that.
That's enough of that. Yeah, my ordination day. Well, you'd have to appreciate my family. My mother, the only comment she made about my ordination was, "What are you going to wear, honey?" And now I had a nice Eva Bacone suit. Ooh, so yeah. I was all about it. And it was a skirt. I know. Well, So my brother came, and he turned his shirt around backwards and introduced himself as the Right Reverend Mobile Holmes.
Love it.
I know, right? And my cousins the one who wanted me to go out of the country were standing behind a tree so they wouldn't be seen. There was standing room only there as well. And I spent the morning being anxious and being silly, going around healing people and things like that.
Oh, wow. How exciting.
Yeah, well, not really healing, but just,
Yes.
I come from a family that is very exhibitionistic, as am I. On the one hand, on the other hand, we're very reserved. If you can imagine those two things coexisting. And so I wasn't someone who could easily be graceful in the moment always. I can now, I couldn't then so much. I mean, I was a kid and nuts. So that day, my ordination was in the afternoon. Linda, my wife now, and her ex-husband were having the party for my ordination. And so they were getting that ready and I was over helping them, and we were making deviled eggs and things like that. I ate so many of the deviled eggs that I can no longer eat deviled eggs. So
we're about applesauce.
Right? You just and I was aware of my friends being around, and my friends came early. We hung out. Most of my friends were in the service. And I think what I did with it was blanket. Because I couldn't imagine this actually happening.
Yeah.
I was shocked that this would be happening.
You remember the year?
Yeah, 1982.
Yeah.
After having started in 1972.
That's what I wanted people to understand. This was a process and a journey to get you from point A to standing in front of everyone in a church with your formal ordination.
Right.
That's a long journey.
It was a journey. And I'm on church and ministry, and some of these people come before us, and say, I'd like to get ordained, and I want to get ordained yesterday. And I want to say, no, you really got to do the process.
Exactly.
Process is important. You don't have to do my process, but you have to do. I'm not one of those old people that says, my day, this is what we used to do. But I do think that people sometimes are afraid of the process.
And they want to skip to the end.
They want to skip to the end. And it's, as they say, cliche, the journey is the critical piece.
Exactly. So now that you've been ordained for a number of years, how do you think we've done ONA? How do you think do you think we've come far enough, or do you think there is still work to do? What is your thought? What are your thoughts about?
Oh my Lord. We have done UCC has done marvelous things. I'm just going to say that around ONA things.
We need to clarify in case someone else is listening. Open and affirming. Can you define that process for people that do not know what the UCC's policy is on open and affirming, or how we got to open and affirming? Well, part of that journey as well.
Yeah, the UCC, there is a process, and it should take a couple of years for a church to become open and affirming by going through materials that will lead the church to come to hopefully a deep and meaningful understanding of what it means to be open and affirming. It's not just, you don't just say, okay, everybody's welcome, because the minute, and this is why I used to say to churches I would visit, yeah, you can say you are, you can say, yeah, the person, as long as they look like you. But the minute the Dykes on Bikes ride up or drag queens come in the door, you start to question. So that has to be looked at. And those are things that the process may or may not help. It should help, but depending on how well the church does the process. But it's critical. And I think Andy has just done incredible work getting us to where we are. However, I would say with that with a caveat that we're nowhere near where we need to be at all. Because it's not just having ONA churches, it's not just having LGBTQ plus ministers, but it's intersecting with all the issues, all the people, all the things that we need to deal with. And if we don't do that, if we as a community of ONA are not willing to step out and not only claim ourselves, but claim others and stand for others and in front of others and by others and sometimes push others, then I'm not sure what the point is, because it's just not about, I'm happy that I got ordained, but my ordination wasn't about me. Never was about me. The only way I got ordained was because it wasn't about me. I knew, well, back then, I knew two things were true: that I was a lesbian and that I was called by God. And no matter what, nobody could take those away from me. And that's hard to be sure. It's hard to be sure of things, but I knew those two things. And one of the things that we did during this educational part of leading up to my ordination was I would go around to churches and let them touch me and say, really? You don't look like a lesbian. I didn't then. And, or as much, and, or whatever they needed to say, however they needed to be in a relationship with me, because for me, it's all about relationship. It's not about anything but relationship and love. And so, that's, and so that's what ONA is. And that's what churches who become ONA, it's not just so you can put a sign on your door. It's so that you can say, my door is open.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Say that again, Ann.
Not just so you can put a sign on my door, but so you can say my door is open.
Yeah, love it. Exactly. It's not about the flag. It's about who is welcome inside.
Exactly.
And how we welcome them inside.
Now, sometimes it's about the flag. For instance, my neighbor across the street in Virginia was the associate minister at the most conservative Presbyterian church in Virginia. And she had a lot of workers over there from church people there all day once. So I got my biggest flag and put it out in front of the house. So they have to see it. So sometimes it's about the flag, but
I love that. We can't forget, that's what, that was a catalyst in our movement was the rainbow flag. We can't forget that. And now we have all the other flags that are inclusive of not only ours, but the Latino community and the African American community. So the flag has begun to diversify itself on its own as we welcome more people into the movement. And I think that's great.
And, I've had a flag. We've had a flag outside our house for 30 years. And we have that there because as a witness, one, this is a safe place, and two, we're queer. And
I love that.
And we live in the suburbs of Vienna, Virginia, or did. And my whole neighborhood were supportive, which was shocking.
Especially then and now. And I love your reference, your biblical reference to the lady in the crowd and Jesus was touched and he said, "Who touched me?" And you
Mhm.
allowed yourself to be free and open to be touched like Jesus. And I'm sure some of it was negative and I'm sure some of it was positive. But were you able to discern
What
when you
did,
were touched?
um, I think in many cases, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely, because it was sort of like a feeling like no other.
Mhm.
This is a moment, you know.
Mhm.
On the other hand, this is not a moment. Um,
Agree.
I had I'll tell you an example. In my church, there was this guy who was Swedish. So he was like 7 feet tall. And I'm 5 feet, in case you didn't know. So he said to me, my biggest concern is you won't be able to hug me. And I said, well, I can hug you. I'm not sure why you're saying that. But I went up to the front of the church, which is where he was standing, and got a chair, got on the chair and gave him a hug. I said, I'm not sure where that comes from, but we can hug other people who are not like us.
Yes. You know, and what do you think about having to I find this really hard when I talk to other brothers and sisters like us and other gay folk like us, gay folk like us, that Jesus loves us no matter who we are and where we are on this journey. And don't be afraid to love Jesus, and don't be afraid to let us love you back. And some of my friends that have grown up in other denominations, and we won't name them, have been so terrified. And I was terrified as well growing up. And in my terror, I knew the nearest MCC church and I went over there for my affirming. It wasn't in my church that I got the affirming. It was when I stepped away from the traditional UCC church, the African American UCC church, that I got that affirming and
Right.
that love that I needed. How do you reconcile today's kind of overall theme of, if we come from another place, will God love us still, and will our parents love us still? Because people are still grappling
Oh,
with, yeah, there you
absolutely.
go. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is still critical today. There's still a rainbow ceiling. There's still prejudice. There's still people being bashed. There's still all this stuff,
Mhm.
you know. And I guess what I hope to say, one of the things that uh Shane, I can't think of his name, UCC guy, we were talking about putting on our websites. This was a long time ago,
Mhm.
open,
Yes.
confirming, gay, blah, blah, blah. And he said that there was a guy in the middle of nowhere who had nowhere to connect. And he was able to go on a website and find this church. And he couldn't get there because it was too far away and he was a kid. But it was a place that gave him some salvation, made him feel like he was connected. And that's what we have to do. I mean, this stuff of well, I don't want to say it negatively. What we have to do is find ways ourselves and in our cohorts to open our arms and bring people in, no matter who they are. I mean, they don't have to be gay, but we definitely need to be what's the word, like affirming, not affirming, but
Just
go, we need to go forward, and we've got to go out and embrace all these people,
mhm.
because there are a lot of people in the world because of being hurt.
Right.
And
Mhm.
no, go ahead.
No, I mean, you're acknowledging your hurt. And I feel like this forum that we're creating today will allow people to know that they've either hurt someone or they're hurting themselves. And it's not that they maliciously did some things. I think it's lack of education, lack of knowledge, lack of a lot of things. What do you think caused this hurt from both sides, the collision of hurt.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Oh, like, like people hurt you. Like, I know my parents hurt me.
Yeah.
They said years later that they didn't realize this was hurtful. They
Yeah.
just felt like I was pulling away from God
Yeah.
with being the way I am, my true authentic self. And once they were educated and realized that we did the right amount of mixing the education piece and the right amount of mixing that it's okay to be gay, they came around. And my dad ended up being one of my biggest heroes on my journey. So you've had this long ministry. How did you mix this marriage of right, wrong, in between, in counseling and therapy, and with all this work that you've done? How did you mix this and make it work for couples and for people that were discerning whether or not it was okay to be gay?
Are you familiar with the concept Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen?
Love it. Love that book. Yes.
Somebody gave that to me when I was graduating from Vanderbilt. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. But what I realized over time is that you, others are wounded healers. Because we're wounded healers, we don't have to go up and say, hi, I can tell you're really hurt. What can I do for you?
Mm-hmm.
What we can do is bring our authentic selves, ourselves with integrity to a situation, to a person, to a moment, and be there. Mm-hmm. And it may be that we cry with them. It may be that we talk with them. It may be that we don't say a word. But our wounded healer informs and impacts who we are in those moments.
You're exactly right.
Uh-huh.
I found that out when I did CPE and chaplaincy, ministry of presence, and just being there, like you said, is the most important thing you can do in these types of situations. But, now that you've had this, you can look back. What would you do differently looking back on Ann? How would Ann do things differently than now that she's looked at her whole career and all the way into retirement? What would Ann do differently?
I would figure out a way to claim myself, to myself. It's very painful to go through life worrying about whether or not you'll be accepted. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know about you, but I walk out the door and wonder.
Me too. I still do. At 60, I still do.
Yeah, right. And so that, I think, and if we could do anything in the church, it would be to bring people together and have them get in touch with their authentic selves and just name it, claim it, and live it. Because that was one of the hardest things for me. Mm-hmm. So you're always kind of going like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt safer with my parents still living. Now that both are dead, I feel, even though I have a partner, a wonderful partner, I still feel alone when I walk outside. I just felt that my parents kind of gave me that undergirding of security and safety, that if anything went wrong, I could call my dad or I could call my mom and they would make it okay. Have you ever had those feelings that
with people like that?
Yeah.
I haven't in a long time, because everybody that I knew growing up abandoned me because of my being gay. Mm-hmm. And in college, we had a wonderful little group of people that we hung out with. And then the last day of college, they found out we were gay, another friend and I, and they stopped talking to us. And my mother didn't have the capability. I mean, my mother's thing was, what are you going to wear, honey? So
Evan Picone was a good designer. So
but I guess my partner, Linda, and we've been together almost 40 years. And, she's somebody I can go to and talk things over with.
Mhm.
But I also have colleagues who are friends.
Mhm.
I think it's really good for people to realize we don't in the Protestant church as much, but in the Catholic church, they'll go to priests and talk about things.
Mhm.
I think it's good if people would come to Protestant ministers, not to talk about issues that are so big that you need to go to a therapist, but
Mhm.
your everyday self-aware, self. How do I find myself? Because I didn't have that and I missed that.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So a lot of my friends want to know, well, who do you talk to? Who do ministers talk to? I think we talk to each other for
Right,
the most part, right?
right.
Why do you think we don't have friends outside of the ministry to rally around us?
Well, I don't know that that's even true. Now, I
Yeah.
would say that I have a lot of friends outside ministry who will
Mhm.
rally around me, but I don't put them in the category you were describing earlier. But um, I would say that ministers feel like they need to work all the time. I don't know why, but we do.
We do.
And so in that working all the time, we don't find ways of developing relationships.
Mhm.
And so we find ourselves either relating to people in the congregation or hospital or whatever, which is inappropriate, or we relate to our spouses and maybe friends of theirs. So I think that we really have to figure out ways not to work so hard and
Mhm.
how to develop a community. I just moved. Linda and
Mhm.
I moved down here 7.5 months ago or something. And we live in this over 55 community in Fuquay Varina.
Mhm.
And oh my God, the first things that people ask you when we got here was, do you have a church home?
Mhm.
And I'm not accustomed to that. I'm from up higher. And I found myself not feeling like I could fit here. Here I was. Here I'm almost 72, and I'm all going through the whole thing all over again
Mhm.
because everybody here is different than I am. And come to find out they're probably really not, but that's what it
Right.
feels like when you first get into a new community
Mhm.
and people are talking a certain way and you don't know that language.
You're exactly right. I can imagine. You know, I have friends and that said, I moved back into my parents' home. We did for I felt comfortable here because I grew up here, but
Yeah.
now I realize things are different here and people are different. We don't even know, but a few of the neighbors, because most of them were our parents' age and have died out. So how do you find community in the midst of what we think is no community for us?
Yeah, that's a good one because I grew up outside of DC,
Mhm.
and DC is not a place that generates community. And
Mhm.
so my Linda thought we were going to move down here, find a church, find community, go out and save the world. Um, and I didn't want to burst her bubble and say it doesn't work that way, probably.
Mhm.
But um, I think that's one way to find a church that
Mhm.
has with like-minded people. Um, Otherwise, what I've learned is that that if somebody isn't participating in the community,
Mhm.
it's usually me. Does that make sense? I'm
Yes.
the one
Mhm.
that's stopping that process because I'm not being open, because I'm looking askance or I'm looking at, you know,
Exactly.
uh, the way somebody talks or the way somebody thinks or, and so,
What do you think your biggest joy is in doing ministry?
in doing ministry.
Yeah, your biggest joy. What gave you the greatest amount of joy?
I think my biggest joy or the thing that I really like to do is being a chaplain
Hmm.
in a church,
Hmm.
because I think that for the most part that's what we are
Hmm.
in churches. Um, And I love being a chaplain.
Me too.
And so I guess I would say, like, for instance, during the pandemic, I had a really small church. I went there to help them sell the building.
Mhm.
And I talked to them every day, somebody every day. And we had meetings and we had gatherings all the time. That to me felt more vital in terms of my ministry than many other things I could have been doing. It's reaching out and well, you'll see my whole thing is relational.
I love it.
You know, that's what we need to be about.
Exactly. A relationship with God, the creator, and Jesus and the work that he did when he was on the earth. I tell people it's all about that relational, correlational relationship that brings us all together.
Right
To
on,
sing
brother.
Kumbaya.
Right. No, but that's it. I mean, that is it. And if it's, you know, when I grew up, love was just a word you threw around, you know.
Exactly.
You know, Funicello and Beach Spank at Bingo and all those things, you know, where love, love. And I never understood with love that there was really a notion that love could stand alone.
Yes. Well, my parents were not affectionate. I don't think they knew how to be affectionate. I mean, they said the right things, but I just remember that my mother wasn't a hugger until she got about 75 or 80. I think a lot of it had to do with her own, like you said, she was wounded. Her mother died Friday before Mother's Day. She never liked to celebrate that. So I grew up kind of feeling really alone on my journey. Even though I was in the church, I didn't feel like I was a participant in the church. So I escaped to MCC every time I had a chance. Thank God there was an MCC church down the street. But other than the books that we associate with Bible, you know, the biblical books and the text and stuff, what do you do outside for reading pleasure or other kinds of pleasure? How does Anne relax herself and rejuvenate herself to keep doing this work?
I have found Audible and mysteries, and I always have my earbud in my ear. In fact, Linda had to remind me to take it out before this. I don't go anywhere without this.
Love
and
it.
I'm always listening to a book. And I could be talking to you and listening to a book.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding.
So you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah. But I do that. That's one of my very favorite things. I had no idea I like mysteries. And I like simple ones. Now, I don't like complex things or, you know, anything. I like something. I'm a simple gal. I like it simple. So that I can take a nap, wake up, and continue listening to the book and not have really missed very much.
Love it.
Yeah.
Now, where's your favorite escape place?
Probably the beach.
Any
Rehoboth is my favorite.
Rehoboth. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now doing ministry, especially our ONA work. Do you think the ONA work that we do competes with environmental justice, racial justice, social justice? How does it fit into the pie of the justices?
Okay, let me tell you what my theory about that is. It just might sound weird or something, but my feeling is that until we deal with Black Lives Matter, with people of African descent, and indigenous people here in this country, we will not really grow to the extent that we could as any of the communities. Because as long as somebody is in the category of a Black person, for instance, and can never get ahead, really, we cannot call ourselves Christian. And so for me, it's not a pie. For me, it's a 7-layer cake or something. And there's the icing, which is usually good, but the icing are people of African descent and people who are indigenous to this frigging country. And if we don't take care of those,
Mhm.
I feel, this is my personal feeling, I believe every minister should be involved with Black Lives Matter or some aspect of people of African descent.
Mhm.
Like Felder Love's
Mhm.
group,
Right.
Safe
I forgot about her
Conversations
group. Yes.
and Racism. And if we don't start doing that, we can talk about ordination, we can talk about gay people, we can talk about Latinx, we can talk about all that stuff,
Mhm.
and it'll get a little bit, but it won't be it won't be the depth that it needs to be, because there's still people who are oppressed, there's still people who are
Right.
enslaved, there's still
Mhm.
people, and that's what we forget about, I think, sometimes. And so my call right now is to work in the arena of people of African descent. That's what I do with my life.
I love that. How many times did you want to quit ministry? You knew it was coming.
My gosh, a bazillion.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my. I could tell, and I won't. I could tell stories. You're in a church and you're begging them to like you.
Yeah.
Not literally begging them, but
Mhm.
you're tap dancing around and you're doing all this stuff and you're
Mhm. Mhm.
wanting to show how good you are. And so, will they like you? Will they like me? Will they like me? Will they like me?
Mhm.
And so a lot. So I feel like that again is back to where we're talking earlier. We've got to figure out ways for people to find themselves and not need the affirmation of other people, that kind of affirmation.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. I'm like you. I think I'm an introvert. I have to work hard at socialization. Even though I was a society columnist, I worked hard at it, but I love my retreats. So I would put forth a lot of synergy and energy, and then I would go back into hermit mode with
Yeah.
my friends and just a small group of my friends to get my energy back. So I think, how did you get that balance of,
What I would do is, and I'm very much like that. If I am with people too much, I have to be alone for a period of time. And so I would never say to a church, I will work X amount of days,
Mhm.
Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because I would know what Tuesday would bring.
Exactly.
And so the way I would talk about it is I will get the work done on my time. And I'm a grown up, so I can figure that out.
Exactly.
Because I think that's what we need. We need ways to refuel. And, I'm not sure why we're afraid to take time off.
Exactly.
And I don't know why. And this is the other thing I would tell search committees. Somebody asked me about this the other day, and I said, treat your minister well. You want to be competitive, treat them well. And that means, make sure they take time off. Give them extra time off. Well, that's no skin off your nose.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So what do you, other than, what's your favorite God story to encourage other young theologians and other promising pastors coming up today? What is a God story that they would identify with?
Oh, that they would identify with.
That they would identify with.
Let me think a minute. I am less about God's stories and more about metaphor, I think. And when I think of Jesus, and this is what I tell folks, for me, Jesus was a guy who rolled up his sleeves
Mhm.
and went to work and did what he needed to do. And sometimes he whined about it. Sometimes he was, needed to go off by
Mhm.
himself and all of that. But
Mhm.
for me, what the gospel is Jesus rolling up his sleeves
Mhm.
and going out and doing it. I say throw theology out the door. I'm
Mhm.
kidding.
But we did, yeah,
But
I love it.
we put so much emphasis on who struck John, or, you know, we don't do creeds in our denomination, but we do other things just like them.
The statement of faith, which is,
Yeah, but we don't, yes, exactly.
I
But
mean, that's one of the biggest things that we do that follows, the other denominations is our statement of faith. I mean, you either say it, once a month, or you say it before communion, or and it's supposed to rally us around the communion process. I think it's a rallying or calling for us, right?
yeah,
Our statement of faith, and we've met and look, we've tampered with it how many times over the last 50
Oh.
years?
I know, right? Yeah, so I guess that's what if somebody asks me, what is your favorite understanding of the whole the sacred text? That's what I would say. And if somebody said to me, what's your vision for ministry?
That was my next question for you, Anne.
Huh?
What is your vision for ministry?
Well, my vision for a new minister is to roll your darn sleeves up and get to work. Find out what your work is, where you fit, and get to work. And you know what that is. And so I love that image. But my vision for ministry, is that what it was, ministry?
Yeah, for ministry, or doing the work we're called to do, the sacred work. I just identify it as sacred work. Whether you are a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or a minister, we're called to do this work. We wouldn't do it if we weren't called to do it. No one would go through what we do as ministers, and especially gay ministers, if we weren't called to do it. God called us, like you said before. Am I right?
Correct. And when I couldn't work because I was dealing with PTSD, right? One of the things I did without realizing I was doing it, and it wasn't until Linda told me, but I meet people on the street. Now, my street isn't Detroit or Compton, but my street is where people are hurting too. And so for me, I'm a minister. I don't tell people that necessarily. I don't go up and say, hi, I'm Ann, I'm a minister. But I show that by the way I interact, by the questions I ask, by the way I am there with them, by who I am in that relationship. And I do that. And for me, street ministry like that is as important. And I have probably brought more people to a sensitivity to LGBTQ plus things, people, as any other way I've done it. Because they just get to know me. We just talk about stuff. And I don't say, how can you believe that you? But and I've had instances where people have told me, that they voted another way, or that they went down this road rather than that road. Straight people for days, So I guess my vision for ministry is do it all the time. It's like Paul, pray without ceasing, be a minister without ceasing, and I don't mean piously. I just mean, while you're having a beer, be a minister.
I like that. And on that note, we will end our conversation with the Reverend Ann Holmes. We will probably reconvene at some point in the future, but Ann, thank you.
Thank you
for doing this.
This was awesome.
This was awesome.
This was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. I was so scared.
Were you? Let me stop the recording.
Not really. I was a little